So it's finally here. So the X570 Dark from EVGA, I actually never thought this would ever happen, but so it is here, so let's check it out. So yes, EVGA actually decided to make an AMD motherboard after, well, it's very sensible as AMD CPUs have gained so much market share over the past like 4 years or so. There's real sense to make a board on the AMD platform, as well as the AMD CPUs are very popular and they are better in some situations than most of the Intel offerings. So X570, it's quite late in the game, but we had quite a bit of debate a while ago, like should the Dark be based on the X570 chipset or on the B550 chipset? Well, mainly pointing out at the B550 Unify-X, as the B550 is a cheaper option, like to just drive the overall cost down. But I think after seeing all of the things on the B550 Unify-X compared to something like the Crosshair VIII Impact for now, I think it was the best move to go for the X570 chipset. Well, of course, the next ones are already in the horizon, but when just like comparing the current offerings, I think X570 was the better option, because as this is a Dark motherboard, it has to be able to support like SLI and Crosshair X configurations, and they are easier to make on the X570 chipset compared to something like B550. I know there are like a few B550 boards that can do SLI. I think one was like Asus B550 ROG Strix or something like this. But anyways, so the B550, at least on all of my testing, it doesn't have any advantage on memory overclocking. As Buildzoid pointed out, it only has some advantage in the base clock capabilities, but that's pretty much it. So X570 is definitely the better option. So yeah, this is pretty much one of the flagship motherboards for the X570 platform for the Ryzen 5000 series CPUs. So let's check it out, this board, very quickly, and see what it comes with, and just go through the board overall. And I will then make like a separate BIOS video and like overclocking test video where I can compare the board against the B550 Unify-X and at the same time against the Asus ROG Crosshair VIII Impact, as I have many single and dual rank Samsung B-die based memories, very good ones, good sticks, and I still have the 5600X CPU, and not sure if this box has some CPU in it as well. But yeah, it's just mainly like how does the board compare like CPU overclocking wise on water to the B550 Unify-X as well as to the Crosshair VIII Impact, and could the X570 Dark be at least somewhat better for dual rank memory overclocking compared to those two boards I already mentioned, because dual rank Samsung B-die memory overclocking is really painful on these AMD Ryzen CPUs. The IMCs just cannot cope with 2x 16GB sticks that well. And most of you, especially who are looking at these boards like this one over here, the Impact, the B550 Unify-X, will be most likely looking at those 2x 16GB options or even larger ones, because 2x8 is quite a low amount of memory nowadays in 2021. So that's why my main interest when it comes to like memory on these modern platforms is in the dual rank like capabilities, because dual rank memories, at least on Intel, they do have performance advantage at the same performance level, like at the same frequency and same timing table. On these Ryzen CPUs, they don't actually have that same performance advantage as on the Intel CPUs. But just saying, so those are just the main points I'm interested to see about this board. So yeah, X570 Dark, Ryzen 5000 desktop ready, Ryzen 3000 and 5000 series compatible. Let's quickly check the backside. Nothing, pretty much. I am breaking the seal on this board, so let's get this board opened up and let's see what it comes with. Okay, so it's this way around. So yeah, pretty similar box as the Z590. We still have the instructions as the first thing you'll see. I think that's pretty useful, pretty handy. So you can refer the quick installation guide if you need any help with your product. So let's put that to the side. And so we have the accessory kit first, and we have the board underneath. We have the included drivers again on a USB stick, pretty standard nowadays, so they don't include DVD or driver CDs anymore. Most are on these small USB sticks. Standoffs, once again, for the guide PCB thingy that works as a base plate for a test bench. So if you want to use the board as a test bench outside a case, or on a test bench, I mean outside a case, you can do it with the provided PCB plate that's underneath the board and with these standoffs over here. I think these are probably for the, well, some screws anyways, some might be for the M.2 drives. We have, I think these are, yeah, Pro-bit cables, at least one. We have same M.2 thermal pads, so it should be pretty much the same, so you can use these thermal pads. I think they will go between the M.2 device and the PCB of the board, as well as the between the M.2 device and this heatsink over here. So you should have like adequate cooling for your M.2 devices, because both the heatsink as well as the PCB of the motherboard can act as a heatsink combination for your M.2 devices. I think these are the Wi-Fi antennas. Well, I never use this because my rig is usually very close to the router, so the Wi-Fi usually works just fine even without these antennas. But of course, you should use these for the best Wi-Fi performance. Just some standard SATA cables, it seems. So pretty standard, nothing really special about it really. And we have a case badge over there. But those are pretty much the accessories. So let's look at the board itself next. That's the PCB guide plate, or base plate, however you want to call it, but that gives you like an overall guide throughout your like motherboard layout, and it works as a base plate for the test bench. So pretty similar as you have already seen. So we have PCI Express CPU lane, X16, so we have X16 if only single card is populated, and we have X8 and X8 if two cards running SLI. The bottom one is probably a chipset PCI Express slot. So pretty similar as you have already seen multiple times when with these boards, I mean. Smart Power Stage ISL 99390. Not sure if Buildzoid has already received once or one of these boards, if he could make like a very extensive like overview of the whole VRAM structure, but well, I think it's labeled quite well already over here. So vCore, CPU, SoC, VDIM. So we have all of the different VRAM parts mentioned on this guide PCB base plate. So pretty standard. I think it's quite handy. So it's definitely something unique about these EVGA Dark motherboards. That's the board itself. And no, the board doesn't come with a lapped 5950X already placed in the socket by anyway. So that's pretty much how the X570 Dark looks like in all of its glory. Pretty similar tone to it as on the mainstream Intel Dark motherboard. So we have the same rotated socket seen for the first time on the AMD platform as a whole now. So looks pretty neat if you ask me. So two full-length X16 PCI Express slots, again X16 and X8 if you want to run two cards in SLI. We have this is a bottom X4 slot with an open end over here, and this time around they actually put the BIOS battery a bit further away, so you should be able to, I think you should be able to mount an X16 device, but I need to test that out myself, because at least on the Z590 the battery was too close to this bottom slot, so it prevents you to install an X16 device on the X4 slot. So I'll have to test that out myself. So the heatsink assembly is pretty large, so we have all of the M.2s underneath this heatsink over here. So you can use the provided M.2 thermal pads to go between the device and the PCB, and probably between the heatsink and the device as well. So you should have adequate cooling for your M.2 devices. Pretty much the same. The overall like heatsink assembly looks to be like pretty much the same as on the Z590 Dark, although we don't have like that copper colored heatsink assembly as on the Z590 Dark, although I was quite a fan of the copper look unless it oxidizes very, very badly. But that's pretty much like an aluminium heatsink assembly, so it's not as heavy as on the Z590 Dark, but should be completely enough anyways. So if we look at this part first, so we have the sound separated from the rest of the motherboard's PCB again, as on other mainstream boards from EVGA. We have one supplementary 6-pin power connector for the PCI Express slots over here. BIOS battery, we have the beeper, or how do you call it, makes a beep sound when you pass the post process and if you want to edit the BIOS and so on. Many of these like connectors are rotated just like on the previous board, so we have many fan connectors that are rotated 90 degrees. We have the 24-pin as well as the two 8-pin power connectors rotated 90 degrees again for easier cable management. And I think I'm pretty large like fan of those power connector replacements nowadays. So I really like that the CPU 8-pin power connectors as well as the 24-pin, they are like stacked together in one group. So I think it's quite good. At least it's good for my use. We have a color-coded front panel connectors over here. When it comes to SATA ports, I'm not sure, but I think all of these are from the chipset now. So you don't really need XP support for these AMD like CPUs and so on. So I'm pretty sure that none of these are running like through a third-party controller like what we have seen on the mainstream Intel motherboards. So at least based on this guide baseplate, we can see all of these SATA ports, they are running to the AMD X570. So yeah, so no third-party SATA ports on this board, but there's no need. There's absolutely no need, because we don't need XP for those stupid old benchmarks like SuperPi and so on these AMD CPUs and platforms. And then we have a USB 3.2 G2 HDR. So probably just Gen 2 header, USB 3.2. Then we have standard USB 3. That's Gen 1, I think. So just front panel connectors for your case. The already mentioned 8-pin power connectors for the CPU as well as the 24-pin. If you run, let's say like 5950X and you plan to do like even just proper overclocking, even on water, I heavily recommend you plug in both of the 8-pin power connectors. And many of the modern power supplies anyways, most of them do have two 8-pin power connectors for the CPU anyway, so it's very easy to plug in both of the 8 pins. And it helps to distribute the load inside the power supply. The only case on these like somewhat mainstream platforms where I've seen that the single 8-pin hasn't been enough was when I tried to overclock. Not sure was it the 8700K or the 1900K, when I tried to overclock it on LN2 on the Z170 MOC formula from ASRock with that particular power supply over there, which is a Seasonic 1300 watt Platinum. I actually triggered the OCP of the 8-pin power connector when there was just a single 8-pin. So it's actually very possible to trigger an OCP of a single 8-pin power connector with these modern components. It's possible, but it's not something easy to do. And you generally need to go beyond water cooling to see high enough loads to do it. But again, if you get like 5950X, definitely plug in both of the 8-pin power connectors, so just saying. Then we have two more fan connectors over here. These are PCI Express disabled switches. There are 5 of them. So I think some of them are for the M.2 devices as well, so they are not all for the PCI Express slots. So if I'm correct about this thing, there should be 2 full-length M.2 slots over here. So it's probably, as there are 5 switches, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's at least what I'm assuming, but you need to check that from the manual itself to see that which devices these are like pointed to. But that's pretty much what I'm guessing, and it should be like so. So you have disabled switches both for the PCI Express slots as well as for the M.2 devices. So we have a slow mode switch over here, and we have triple BIOS. I think this could be the first time we see a triple BIOS present on an AMD motherboard, or that's at least what I feel. And if you look at this part of the board, we have the power and reset buttons over here, dual debug LED. Again, one of those ports is the real debug LED, and then we have, well, they work together as a combination for a monitoring device inside the operating system. So if you want to monitor things about the board and the whole system, you can do it with this device over here. So you can monitor like CPU temperature, maybe CPU die temperature, PWM temperature, some of the main voltages and so on. So it's pretty handy. I really like it, and it's actually quite accurate. And this port is for the BIOS flashback utility. So if you want to use the BIOS flashback on these EVGA boards, you need to put the BIOS file in a FAT32 or a FAT16 formatted USB stick, plug it over here, and then just press the reset button for 5 seconds. The main difference between EVGA boards, or it has been compared to many other like boards from other vendors, is that these EVGA boards, they need to turn up or turn on to do the BIOS flashback process. So at least on many boards from like Asus, it doesn't need to turn on the whole system to flashback the BIOS. So if you start the BIOS flashback process and it then suddenly turns up the system, don't get scared. It's absolutely normal with these EVGA boards. I'm assuming, so we have one clear Cmos button over here at the like the main part of the board. So the only minus about this clear Cmos button over here is that you can accidentally press it if you are not careful. So if you are trying to reach for the safe boot button over here, you could accidentally press the clear Cmos button while the system is running, and that's absolutely nothing you want to do at all. 2 memory slots, so just one DIMM per channel. That's absolutely like intentionally made. So when you only have 2 memory slots, so 1 memory slot per channel, as this is a dual channel platform, it generally helps a lot with the memory overclocking to reach higher frequencies and better timings at high frequencies. So that's why, if you are, what I already said at the beginning, if you are looking at these boards, it's very likely you are going to look at those dual rank memory options, like 2 times 60 GB kits or 32 gigs in total, or even 64 GB. Because if you just look at those single rank options like 2 8 GB sticks, that's quite a low amount of memory nowadays in 2021. Those dual rank sticks, they generally don't have performance advantage on these AMD platforms, and they have been very, very difficult to overclock on these AMD platforms. Like, I haven't been able to go any higher than 4133 or 4200 on the B550 Unify-X and on the Crosshair VIII Impact from Asus. So if the EVGA X570 Dark could go at least somewhat higher, it would definitely be much superior to those other like flagship boards from other vendors in that regard, and that would be a huge thing. That's the main thing people have been moaning about on these AMD platforms, that they are very bad with those dual rank, like larger capacity memory sticks. So we only have single Pro bit connector over here. So well, on the AMD platforms you don't need that many voltages to monitor. So mainly like vCore, SoC voltage and memory voltage and so on. But yeah, the CPU fan connectors are actually over here. That's CPU fan 2, CPU fan, I think that's CPU fan 1. And if you look at the rear I/O, so we have a PS2 combo port for your mouse and keyboard. If you want to use both mouse and keyboard, you need to use a Y splitter cable that splits the combo port into individual mouse and keyboard connection. 2 USB 3.0 ports underneath it. We have the reset Cmos button over here. Again, this I/O plate or shroud prevents you to touch it with your finger, which is kind of annoying. We have the Wi-Fi antenna ports over here. Dual LAN, both are 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports, and 4 more USB ports underneath them, and 1 USB Type-C port over there, and your 7.1 audio. So that's pretty much it. That's the X570 Dark in all of its glory. I guess nothing at the back side. Oh well, we have a nice logo on the back side of the board. And yeah, we still have a tiny hole at the socket area. Yeah, if you were brave enough to attach like a probe underneath the CPU. But with these AMD CPUs, that's pretty stupid because all of these pins are underneath the CPU. So you cannot pretty much install like a probe at the back side of the CPU. So the tiny hole at the center of the socket is pretty useless nowadays. But it's still there, but none of you will be utilizing it. I'm pretty sure about that. But yeah, so let me know what you think. What do you think about the choice about going for AMD from EVGA's perspective? I think it's absolutely needed, and it was something they absolutely had to do, in my opinion. So this board should be available in much larger quantities compared to the many like recent dark motherboards like X290 Dark, SR3 Dark, the mainstream Intel Darks, Z390, Z490, Z590. This one should be available in much larger quantities, so it should be much easier to obtain than most of the other dark motherboards we have seen this far, and it should be more available soon, at least in the European market compared to the other dark motherboards as well. So not sure about the price, but that's pretty much like those are like the main specs, so it's pretty much the same thing as the Z590 Dark. So the X570 Dark is almost like Z590 Dark that went AMD. Very similar in many ways. So the main focus will be inside the BIOS, obviously, like how well it overclocks and how does it compare, how does the CPU and memory overclocking compare to the other important flagship motherboard models like B550 Unify-X from MSI and the Crosshair VIII boards like the Extreme and Impact from Asus. That's at least what I think. So stay tuned for that. I will be testing that out very soon. So give this video a thumbs up if you like to see this board and if you are happy that EVGA actually went for AMD after many years of thinking about the idea. Subscribe to my channel, it would definitely help me out a lot. And yeah, thanks for watching one of my videos once again, and I'll see you on the next one.